right. Welcome to the... no, let me start that again. Welcome to the Relentless Redstorm. Pressure is not the enemy. Pressure is proof. Every possession tells the truth. Every closeout reveals the work. This is not a team hoping the moment breaks their way. This is a team training the moment to break first. Welcome to the Relentless Redstorm. Man, I'm having trouble this morning.
It's the excitement of Friday's game.
I think you're right. Let's deal with DePaul quickly because that game wasn't just about DePaul. It was actually about behavior. Road floor, trap energy, ugly first half, and St. John's never blinked.
Last night definitely showed how important Dylan Mitchell has become to this team. He was in foul trouble in the first half, but ended up playing close to 30 minutes, I believe 28 minutes, and had a not his best game if you look at the stats, but his impact on the game is immeasurable. Um, and he seems, I don't want to quite say Andre Karolinko, um, but the
What an
type of player,
analogy.
the type of player who can fill up a stat sheet by giving a team what they need. Um, he's had games where he's scored 17 points. He's had games where he's gotten into double figures, and he's been the leading rebounder on the team since he's gone into the starting lineup. He's had a game with 6 assists. Um, he's had a game with 4 steals. So he seems to give the team what they need when they need it. And that continued yesterday because the team looked a little disjointed in the first half. Give DePaul credit as well for that. But he helped stabilize the team. They looked a lot better with him on the floor. And, that was trap game energy. Um, it looked like a possible trap game at the end of the first half, but they had a big run that spanned the end of the first half and the beginning of the second half, and once they took that lead, they never looked back. So kudos to the St. John's Red Storm, Rick Pitino, for winning their eighth in a row and setting up a huge matchup with number three UConn Huskies. You know, Pitino talked about UConn at the beginning of the season at Media Day, which we were at. Uh, Hurley talked about St. John's on Media Day before the season began. So these teams have been on a collision course. We knew UConn was going to be there. Um, After that Providence loss at MSG, we didn't know if if St. John's was going to uh, be there, but they're here. Eight in a row has put them there, and now this is going to take us back to those big matchups that the team had in October, in November, going against a powerhouse, and we are going to see what this team is made out of on Friday night.
Absolutely. You know, going back to your point about Dylan Mitchell, and he's been my guy all season. The article I just wrote about where they've elevated because he's now in the starting lineup. You couldn't be more accurate in your assessment of his willingness to be whatever the team needs. He said that, Patino's recognized it, but here's what happened last night that was so critical to your point is that Mitchell was at the basket. The ball wasn't going in. This guy did not flinch. Things weren't going down for him, even though he was right there. He didn't give up on offense, but he dug in even deeper on defense. And although he got into foul trouble, the fouls were not, again, the difficulty of the Big East is that the refs let you play until they don't. And Mitchell has been phenomenal all season in being that catalyst where he gets the steal or gets the block and then comes down the other way and makes the transition basket, either, putting it in himself or making the assist. He's the catalyst that takes this team to the next level. And last night you could see DePaul was doing their best to make Mitchell uncomfortable, to kind of push him off the block a little bit more, because they recognize that next to Ejiofor, he really is the center and heart of the team in terms of how he plays and really picks them up to the next level. And his composure last night carried through the entire team. I actually mentioned this to, a St. John's fan, that their coherence as a team is beginning to really come into rhythm together, where you see they're almost like all on the same page. And what Mitchell did last night to that point was the fact that he didn't let it get to him when they were just making him have to work a little bit harder, have to do a little bit more, and the ball wasn't just, flowing the way that it normally does with him, but he didn't give up. And the key to the second half of this game against DePaul was the fact that they got 15 forced, deflections, and turnovers in that second half that just absolutely dismantled everything DePaul was trying to do. And here's the connective tissue for that, with the St. John's coming, with the UConn game coming up on Friday. You don't beat UConn with emotion. You don't beat them with runs. You beat them with possession by possession authority. They are a premier elite half-court team. And you have to stay patient, stay connected, and stay inside the plan against UConn, and really what is the signature of now a Danny Hurley team. And St. John's, from the standpoint of composure, is really beginning to show that. And I think they're actually favored 53% for Friday night at Madison Square Garden. And Darrell, we actually circled this at the beginning of the season. We said this was the game of the season from that, media day. Even though we talked about, the other games, Pitino had circled Kentucky, and I think this team did start to become the team we expected them to be, although the Providence loss obviously was a setback. But, you also called it. You looked for post-Kentucky them to go on a run. You were expecting 9-0. They went 8-1. So, and really 9-1 when you think about it. It's not 10-0, but it is a phenomenal run they've been on, and they're continuing to climb.
Interesting. I just Googled the spread, and I'm seeing UConn is favored by 3.5 points, which makes sense.
Right.
They are the number 3 team in the country. They've only lost one game. It was to the number 1 team in the country, and they were missing 2 starters. And though it's on paper a home game, UConn's been good all season. Whereas I think there are definitely some UConn fans some Red Storm fans that, checked out and were like, I'll give these tickets up. And
well,
now
you had the negative Nellies just flood
absolutely.
the market.
and they're like, hey, let me make this money up for these UConn fans. I get it. I laugh because a couple of years ago the Knicks were in the playoffs against the Philadelphia 76ers, and it sounded like MSG South. So I get it. And some cocky UConn fans like to call MSG Store South. So I get it. I get If you are a uh, season ticket holder for the St. John's Red Storm and gave up hope and said, you know what, let me make some money. Uh, you did that. You got a UConn fan to pay big bucks for the ticket, and now you want to be in the building. Um, so there will be UConn fans. Hopefully, it is predominantly a Red Storm crowd. Um, but this isn't your typical home game. This will be the toughest challenge of the season. Not that UConn is the most talented roster that St. John's has faced. They are the best team that St. John's has faced because Hurley has them operating as a team, as a cohesive unit, going for that third title in 4 years um, with a well balanced attack. And I think um, one of the biggest factors on Saturday will be the ability to rebound the ball. Obviously, rebounding has been something that we've talked about all season. Dylan Mitchell has definitely helped uh, by being inserted into the starting lineup and leads the team in rebounding since he's been inserted into the starting lineup. But Reed Jr., he's a big boy. Big guy, averages nearly 8 rebounds a game. So keeping him off uh, the offensive boards, preventing him as Zuby and others crash the offensive boards, keeping him off the defensive boards will be a huge factor. Uh, in terms of everybody else, Solo Ball is the team's leading scorer, but this is not a team. UConn is not a team that relies on any one player to score the ball. Karaban is a great shooter, two-time champion. He could go off at any moment if you lax on defense, and that's probably the entire team. So defensively, the St. John's Red Storm are going to have to be a well-oiled machine to be able to compete with the UConn Huskies on Friday night.
Absolutely right. And this is where Rick Pitino is different in 2026. It isn't pressure for chaos, it's pressure for choice elimination. And you're seeing the progression game by game to the credit of not just any individual player on this team, but the players on the floor, whoever Rick Pitino is putting into his lineup, is really focused on becoming cohesive as a unit. And that I think, really to the point of what this matchup about, UConn and St. John's really comes down to is the difference in the basketball IQ and choices that the St. John's players are making this year against their opponents, and now coming up against number 3 in the nation. You're absolutely right about Tarris Reed Jr. being the big boy on the block. Ejiofor played him really well last year, and this year it's going to be the matchup of those two. The difference is that St. John's now has a phenomenal front court in Ejiofor, Mitchell, and Hopkins. And Bryce Hopkins last night against DePaul, and truthfully, going back to Butler and Xavier, Bryce Hopkins has absolutely stepped up his game to a level that is necessary to play against UConn. Because now you have 3 bigs to go up against UConn and really, really disrupt, them on both offense and defense. You got Ruben Prey coming off the bench. But I think the matchup that's really going to be the key factor to this game is Joson Sanon. And Rick Pitino has had this incredible success this year. First with keeping Dylan Mitchell on the bench until the Providence loss, benching Dylan Darling, and now getting a level of play out of him where his nickname is Church Bells, and we know why. And the same thing is happening with Joson Sanon. And last night's game, I think Joson Sanon was the unsung hero of the game last night because, again, he played exceptionally quiet success. He was not the guy on the floor that you necessarily noticed. He was the guy on the floor, like Dylan Mitchell before him, doing the little things that you don't notice but make the difference in the game. He was, bumping players, clearing the box out properly, getting in guys' face, and also on offense, he was creating space. His pull-up jumper, is starting to fall. And I think that's what we need to see, especially up against a very, very elite defense that's going to go after Zuby. They're going to, really look for the coverage and push St. John's to the outside. And it's going to come down to, really making those critical, shots. I think, UConn's defense is elite at the rim. But athletic wings like Sanon, who can shoot in rhythm, rebound out of space, and attack closeouts, that's where they're human, and that's Joson Sanon.
I just want to, maybe I said this before, maybe I didn't. The one loss to number one Arizona, UConn was missing two starters. Reed Jr. didn't play, Mullins didn't play, and they lost that game by 14 points. Excuse me. Yeah. No, by only 4 points. So you can easily say if those two guys had played, maybe even if one of them had played, UConn would be number one and Arizona would be two or three. So um this game is as we predicted, as a lot of people um looked at on the schedule. I thought it was a good thing that Pitino would get to uh, look into the cauldron and figure out what pieces work the best. And with its team coming together in February and then going into March, the Big East tournament, and then the NCAA tournament, and that's what we have saw. Um, you know, there are a lot of fans, including myself, that were uh, I had taken for granted that this was an NCAA tournament team. And I'm back to taking that for granted. But after that Providence loss, I'm thinking, I can't take the NCAA tournament for granted now. This team looks horrible. Um, but that's what Pitino making the big change with Dylan Mitchell coming to starting lineup now, 8 games later, 8-0. This is a measuring stick game. Can St. John's Red Storm win this game? Hope so. Um, but if they do not win the game, do they lose by a couple of points? Um, does UConn run them off the floor? I don't see that happening. But again, this is going to be a measuring stick game. And then there's another game later this month at UConn. So the Red Storm have two big tests this month against the number 3 team in the country, a team that has a legitimate shot of winning their third championship in 4 years. It doesn't get any bigger than Friday night, 8 p.m. at the world's most famous arena.
You said it best. Going back to the preseason, they were ranked 4 and 5. Obviously, UConn has held on to that ranking all season. They haven't had the drop that St. John's did. But when you look at it from the growth perspective, what this St. John's team has managed to do with those early season matchups is, again, create this transformation that all of us at the beginning of the season were excited about the team, excited about the opportunity, excited about the potential for March. Now you're actually seeing that potential transformed into actual results. And Friday night, win or lose, this is not just a pivotal, game of the season. This is really the preview of March. This is the tournament right now. We saw a great game in October that was preseason against Michigan. That was absolutely a preview of March. We saw another great game against Alabama. That was the beginning of the season, and the team was exposed for what they didn't have yet, which was that composure and that cohesion. Another great game against, Auburn in the Vegas tournament. They weren't prepared. Pitino even said it. They were preparing for Houston. They wound up getting Auburn. Second half, they fell apart. The reality is that St. John's failed early tests, and they were tests. This is another test. The difference is this is conference. This is for the right to be number one in the conference. This is also for the momentum going into March. They have another game later this month. But this game really sets the table, depending on the outcome, for whether that game becomes even more critical or it becomes a separation game. So you have two elite teams that I think are both poised for a fantastic opportunity in March to go deep. Obviously, everybody's now talking about UConn being able to take it all. But it's interesting to listen to the commentators as well as the fans who fell off return to this idea of St. John's going deep. I know you fell off. I never fell off because, again, this is a Pitino team. And Pitino likes to, sort of mix it up to get his, players ready. And we saw this last year with the team that he created. This year, he tested them even harder. He threw them into the wolves. And they're coming out battered and bruised, but stronger, tougher. Again, I think their composure is becoming concrete. I think their rhythm is really starting to come together as an orchestra. And look for Ian Jackson, who, again, everybody all season has been criticizing him about the fact that he's not a point guard, criticizing him about the play and the up and down, sort of struggle he's had. This guy has taken on a role that he didn't expect to, take on when he came to the team at the beginning of the season. He has been absolutely stoic in the way that he's accepted the criticism, accepted the, very tough love from Coach Pitino, and his game continues to elevate. I think against UConn, all he needs is a couple of early threes, a big transition pull-up, and this guy is going to be playing at a level, on top of the fact that Ian Jackson is a big game player. There hasn't been a game that I think that he hasn't shown up. He's gotten into foul trouble. A lot of times, I don't necessarily think that it's been an issue of him being reckless, as much as it has been, again, the transformation that Pitino forced him into, really learning that role, learning, the difference between who he was before he came to this team and what Pitino needed him to be. He is becoming an elite guard not only at the college level, but I think he's really going to be ready as Pitino expects him to be for the draft in April.
Thing I will push back on. UConn is elite. UConn has proven that they are elite um, through the season thus far. St. John's has not proven that they are on that level. They have not proven they are an elite team. A win on Friday night would say we are elite. Our preseason ranking was legit, and we are here to try to win the Big East Conference, despite a great UConn team being in the conference. Um, but a loss on Friday would tell me that this team is not elite because they lose to uh, every top 25 team, every top 15 team they play against. Um, so I'm not quite ready to call this team elite yet.
That's fair enough. I accept your criticism. I also appreciate the fact that you're absolutely right about the fact that they have not beaten an elite team this season. I think that the opportunity for them for this Friday is theirs to seize. And if they don't, you absolutely have the right to say they're not an elite team yet. Yet, DePaul showed discipline. Butler showed resilience. You go back to Seton Hall. You go back to Villanova. This team has slowly developed and emerged into a team they were not at the beginning of this season. They were not elite. Friday will be the opportunity for them to add that to their title, to become that elite version that we've been expecting all season. So I absolutely applaud you for pushing back on me on that, standpoint, because the excitement around this team has everything to do with how they've played in January. And you have to get credit for that, Darrell, because again, you talked about it after the loss that if they could run the table up to this game, that would make a huge difference in their season because they fell off. They literally fell off a cliff with Providence. And they have absolutely taken step by step the opportunity to climb back to relevance. And they're in the top 25. Now they have to show that not only can they stay in the top 25, but that they can beat a top team. Because that's what it's going to take in March. You don't get a second chance. And I think that's what has slowly been built into them. Now, obviously, this is why I love the game of basketball. You got to play it. So we will see on Friday night whether or not this team continues to firmly cement their mindset and their ability into that cohesive unit that can take on and show up for a team like for a team like UConn and come out on the other side with a victory.
These are the last two tests of the season. The biggest test is coming up on Friday. Uh, if they are victorious, they will have an even bigger test coming up when they play uh, UConn on the road. Uh, it's obviously possible they could face UConn a third time in the Big East tournament, or even a fourth time in the NCAA tournament. But our belief in this team and how far it can go in the NCAA tournament will heavily rely on their performance against UConn in February, starting on Friday.
Yeah. And one other thing to just sort of reflect on in terms of this particular St. John's team, and I actually did some research on this in terms of the Pitino teams that have gone deep in the tournament. And one of the things about every Pitino team that made it past the Elite Eight was the level or the ratio of their defensive ranking as well as their offensive ranking. And this particular St. John's team, if they can keep up what they're doing right now, they are actually at one of the top levels in terms of both offense and defensive ranking. They just need to get a little bit higher on the defensive ranking because their offense is premier. And their offense hasn't actually really clicked consistently all season. You're seeing great performances by individual players. Zuby Ejiofor is leading the team in most of the statistical offensive categories as well as defensive categories, but he hasn't necessarily been the standout, dominant, consistent player on the team all season. He's had some games where he has not really shown up because he's been challenged by the other team, and he's relied on other players on the team to be able to show up. And that's the exciting thing about this team is that every night it could be a different player. Bryce Hopkins is now playing at an exceptional level. Dylan Mitchell, obviously, since he's been inserted into the starting lineup, has transformed, both himself and the team in terms of what he's capable of doing. Ozziah Sellers is beginning to really, come into his own in terms of being confident with the ball, not just, an open look, but being able to, shoot off the bounce, as well as being able to, step into a shot with a hand in his face. Something that he was very tentative to do early in the season. And to the, point of Rick Pitino saying some interesting things this season, he said he wanted Ozziah Sellers to shoot the ball every chance he got. He wished he would shoot more. And, that's one of the things I've been looking for all season is Sellers really taking what Pitino said and applying it the same way that Hopkins has begun to apply what Pitino said about him in terms of becoming the ultimate alpha dog and really taking, the ball in his body to every player that goes against him.
I think you can look at metrics that tell you this team is better than they have performed against the good teams. But and I will give them credit for beating the Seton Halls, the Villanovas, who were at one point in time this season ranked in the top 25, be it in the after 20. But at the end of the day, basketball is about what you do on the court against the best. And we have not seen this team be able to come away with victories when they play the best teams. Um, so ultimately, for St. John's fans to have the most hope they can have, got to take one of these two games against UConn. Got to. Now, if they lose on Friday and they win in Stores, great road win. If they hold down home field advantage on Friday and then use that lose at UConn in Stores, so be it. But they got to get a victory. Otherwise, you know, uh, you know, my hope will not be as high as it was in the preseason. Got to show me something on the court. This 8-game win streak has brought me to a place where I'm back believing again. They're definitely a tournament team. Because again, I was shaky for a while after Providence, but they're definitely a tournament team. But can we have that belief that they're a second weekend team in the tournament? And that will be gauged by how they do on Friday, how they do later in the month, against UConn. Because again, if you beat everybody else, but you don't beat UConn, how good are you?
That's a great point, Darrell. And I think the way, to look at it is that January showed this team and built in this team discipline and resilience. Friday is all about identity. And to your point, forget about the rankings, forget about the narratives. It's about 2 hours on the floor in which this team has to look at itself, and it's no longer about who are we really, it's about what do we want to be. So if St. John's is able to impose their way of playing on the most composed team in the league in UConn, to your point, pressure is what it's all about, and the point is here. And with that, I will give you the last word.
This is the biggest point of the season up until this point. With the win, the next biggest part of the season becomes the game at UConn. But we're gonna learn a lot about this team. If they win, fantastic. If they lose a close one, it's tough, but they hung in there with a team that is legit top three in the country. If they get blown out, you got to wonder, was the 8-game winning streak fool's gold? And I want to keep believing that this team can be a second weekend team, and then from there, who knows? It's all about who you match up with. But that belief starts with them beating UConn. And that's what this team needs to do. We will see if they can do it on Friday at 8 p.m. at the world's most famous arena.
All right. You've been listening to the Relentless Redstorm. If you're listening on the train, watching the highlights late at night, we've been carrying this program with us since the beginning. We want to thank you and ask you to like and follow. If this conversation hit for the first time and just sharpened how you see the game, take a second to support us and what we're building here. Follow the Relentless Redstorm. Again, with my partner in the storm, Darrell Jazz Johnson. I want to thank you. I'm Joson Sanon, and we look forward to seeing you post Friday night.